Marine Corporal Jessica Martinez adjusted her body armor one last time as the convoy prepared to roll out into the dusty streets of Fallujah. The year was 2004, and the second battle for the city was about to begin. Around her, the other Marines checked their weapons and gear with the practiced movements of soldiers who had done this dance too many times. "Martinez, you sure you can handle this?" Sergeant Thompson called out, his voice carrying that familiar tone of doubt she had grown to hate. "This ain't gonna be like the training exercises back at Quantico." Jessica bit back her first response and simply nodded. At 23 she had already proven herself in 3 previous deployments, but somehow it was never enough. Being one of the few female Marines in a combat unit meant every mistake was magnified, every success minimized. Staff Sergeant Williams, the squad leader, walked over to where Jessica was double-checking her medical kit. She had volunteered to be the unit's combat medic, knowing that her smaller frame and quick reflexes would serve her well in tight spaces where wounded Marines might need help. "Martinez, I'm putting you with 2nd Squad today," Williams said, avoiding her eyes. "They're taking the easier route through the Market District." Jessica's jaw tightened. The Market District meant fewer combat opportunities, less chance to prove herself. Meanwhile, her male counterparts would be heading into the heart of the fighting. "Sir, with respect, I'd prefer to stay with 1st Squad, she replied. "My medical training would be more useful where the heaviest fighting is expected." Thompson laughed harshly. "What's the matter, Martinez? The easy assignment not good enough for you? Maybe you should have stayed home and let the real Marines handle this." Several other Marines chuckled, but Jessica noticed that Private First Class Danny Rodriguez didn't join in. The young Marine from Texas had always treated her with respect, unlike some of the others who seemed to think her presence somehow diminished their unit's effectiveness. "The assignment stands," Williams said firmly. 2nd Squad needs a medic to. As the convoy began to move, Jessica found herself in the back of a Humvee with 3 Marines she barely knew. Corporal Mike Stevens sat across from her, cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time that morning. He was known for his precision shooting, but also for his belief that women had no place in combat. "So Martinez," Stevens said without looking up, "what's your exit strategy when things get hot? Gonna call for backup the first time you hear gunfire?" "I don't have an exit strategy," Jessica replied calmly. "Same as you, I'm here to complete the mission and bring everyone home." Stevens snorted. "Right. We'll see how long that lasts when the bullets start flying." The convoy wound through the narrow streets of Fallujah, past buildings scarred by previous battles. Children watched from doorways, their eyes old beyond their years. Jessica had been here before, had seen the way war aged everyone it touched. Her radio crackled to life. "All units, be advised, we're getting reports of enemy movement in sectors 7 and 9. Stay alert." Jessica checked her weapon one more time and adjusted her medical bag. Whatever doubts her fellow Marines had about her abilities, she knew the truth. She had trained harder than most of them, studied combat medicine until she could perform procedures in her sleep, and had already saved lives in previous deployments. But none of that seemed to matter in their eyes. She was still just a woman, trying to do a man's job. The Humvee hit a pothole, jarring everyone inside. Through the bulletproof glass, Jessica could see Iraqi civilians going about their daily lives despite the tension in the air. A woman in a black hijab hurried past, clutching the hand of a small boy. For a moment, their eyes met, and Jessica saw something that transcended language and culture, the universal look of someone trying to protect what they loved most. Contact left. The driver suddenly shouted. The distinctive crack of AK-47 fire echoed off the buildings, and Jessica felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with combat. This was it. This was where she would prove, once and for all, that she belonged here. Stevens grabbed his rifle and prepared to return fire. But Jessica was already moving, checking the positions of her teammates and preparing for whatever was about to come. The doubts of her fellow Marines faded into background noise. Right now, all that mattered was the mission and keeping her team alive. The Humvee lurched as the driver took evasive action, tires squealing against the pavement. Through the radio, Jessica could hear reports from other units in the convoy. 1st Squad, the one she had wanted to join, was already in heavy contact. "This is Alpha 1-6, came Williams' voice over the radio. "We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate support." Jessica keyed her radio. "Alpha 1-6, this is Martinez. I can provide medical support if needed." There was a long pause before Williams responded. "Negative, Martinez. Stay with 2nd Squad." Stevens looked at her with something that might have been surprise. "You actually want to go toward the shooting?" "It's what I trained for," Jessica replied simply. The radio crackled again. All units, be advised. We have multiple casualties. In first squad. Repeat, multiple casualties. Jessica's training kicked in. Casualties meant her skills were needed, regardless of what anyone thought about her gender or her place in the unit. She began mentally cataloging her medical supplies and thinking through the fastest routes to reach wounded Marines. But orders were orders, and for now she was stuck with second squad, listening to the battle rage around them while her fellow Marines questioned whether she had what it took to be one of them. What none of them knew was that in less than 2 hours, Jessica Martinez would face a test that would not only prove her courage beyond any doubt, but would also set in motion a chain of events that would change everything they thought they knew about strength, sacrifice, and what it truly meant to be a Marine. The convoy continued through the streets of Fallujah, and Jessica prepared herself for whatever lay ahead, knowing that today would be the day that would define not just her career, but her entire life. The attack came without warning. One moment, Second Squad's Humvee was navigating through a relatively quiet section of Fallujah's market district, and the next, the world exploded into chaos. The first RPG struck the vehicle behind them, sending a plume of black smoke and twisted metal into the air. Jessica felt the shockwave through the floor of their Humvee as their driver, Lance Corporal Peterson, jerked the wheel hard to the right. Contact right, contact right, contact right. Stevens shouted into his radio as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple buildings around them. Jessica ducked instinctively as bullets began pinging off their armored vehicle, but her mind was already racing through medical protocols. The Humvee behind them had taken a direct hit, and there would be casualties. Peterson, get us to cover. Corporal Hayes, the squad leader, yelled from the front seat, but Peterson didn't respond. Jessica looked up to see him slumped over the steering wheel, blood spreading across his uniform. The Humvee was drifting toward a concrete barrier. Without thinking, Jessica lunged forward and grabbed the wheel, pulling it hard to the left as Hayes tried to reach Peterson. The vehicle lurched into an alley between two buildings, providing them with temporary cover from the crossfire. Peterson's hit bad, Hayes said, his voice tight. Martinez, can you help him? Jessica was already moving, her medical training taking over. She pulled Peterson back from the wheel and quickly assessed his wounds. A bullet had struck him in the shoulder, missing the major arteries but causing significant bleeding. He'll live if we can get him evacuated, she reported, applying pressure bandages, but he needs real medical attention soon. Stevens peered out through the bulletproof glass. We've got bigger problems. Those PG guys are setting up for another shot, and we're sitting ducks in here. Through her radio, Jessica could hear the chaos unfolding across the battlefield. First Squad was still in heavy contact, Third Squad was pinned down, and now Second Squad was trapped in an alley with a wounded driver and enemies closing in from multiple directions. Alpha Base, this is Alpha 2-4, Hayes spoke into his radio. We have one urgent casualty and are taking fire from multiple positions. Request immediate extraction. The response was not what they wanted to hear. Alpha 2 for extraction is not possible at this time. All other units are in heavy contact. You need to hold your position until support is available. Jessica finished, stabilizing Peterson, and looked around their improvised position. The alley provided cover from the main street, but she could see movement on the rooftops above them. They were about to be surrounded. Hayes, we need to move, she said. If we stay here, we're going to get hit by fire from above. Stevens looked at her with skepticism. And go where exactly? It's a war zone out there. Jessica pointed to a building across the street. That structure has good sightlines and multiple exit routes. If we can get there, we can set up a defensive position and wait for support. That's 50 meters of open ground, Hayes said. We'd be exposed the whole way. Better than waiting here to get picked off, Jessica replied, as if to emphasize her point. A burst of automatic weapons fire from the rooftop above sent concrete chips raining down on their vehicle. Hayes made his decision. Stevens, Rodriguez, you take Peterson and head for that building. Martinez and I will provide cover fire. Sir, Jessica said, I should be the one helping Peterson. I'm the medic, and I need your rifle. Hayes replied. Rodriguez has medical training too. He can handle Peterson for 50 meters. Jessica wanted to argue, but she knew Hayes was right. Rodriguez had been a volunteer firefighter before joining the Marines and knew basic trauma care. They prepared for the dash across the street. Jessica checked her weapon one more time and took a deep breath. This was it, the moment every Marine trains for but hopes never comes. On my mark, Hayes said. 3, 2, 1, go. They burst from the alley, Stevens and Rodriguez carrying Peterson between them while Jessica and Hayes laid down covering fire. The street erupted with enemy gunfire, bullets whining past them and kicking up dust from the pavement. Jessica saw muzzle flashes from 3 different windows and began engaging targets with precise aimed shots. Her M16 barked repeatedly as she moved across the street, using proper fire and movement techniques to keep the enemy suppressed. They were halfway across when she heard Stevens cry out and saw him stumble. He had been hit in the leg but kept moving, determined to get Peterson to safety. Then Jessica saw the RPG team setting up in a window directly ahead of them. The rocket-propelled grenade was aimed right at the building they were trying to reach. RPG, RPG, she shouted, but there was nowhere to go. They were caught in the open with wounded teammates and no cover. Jessica made a split-second decision that would haunt the dreams of everyone who witnessed it. Instead of seeking cover, she turned toward the RPG team and began advancing directly at them, firing as she moved. Her aggressive action caught the enemy fighters off guard. They had expected the Americans to retreat or take cover, not charge directly at a prepared position. Jessica's accurate rifle fire forced them to duck, disrupting their aim just as they fired the RPG. The rocket-propelled grenade sailed wide, exploding against a building wall behind the Marines instead of directly into their path. But Jessica's heroic charge had put her in an exposed position, and enemy fighters from multiple windows began concentrating their fire on her. The first bullet hit her in the left arm. The second struck her body armor, knocking the wind out of her but not penetrating. The third and fourth bullets hit her legs, sending her sprawling to the pavement. But Jessica Martinez wasn't done fighting. Even as blood seeped from her wounds, she continued to return fire from her position on the street, keeping the enemy suppressed while her teammates reached safety. Martinez is down, Hayes shouted into his radio. We need immediate medical evacuation. From her position on the pavement, Jessica could see more enemy fighters moving into position. The battle was far from over, and she was about to discover just how far she was willing to go to protect her fellow Marines. Duds, enemy fire intensified around her. Jessica prepared for the fight of her life, not knowing that her actions in the next few minutes would become legendary among the Marines who served with her, and that the story of her courage would eventually reach the highest levels of the military command. The girl they had doubted was about to show them what a real Marine looked like under fire. Jessica lay on the hot pavement of the Fallujah street, blood pooling beneath her as enemy fire continued to rain down from the surrounding buildings. Each breath was agony, and she could feel her strength ebbing away with every heartbeat. But her rifle was still in her hands, and her teammates were depending on her. From the building they had reached, she could hear Hayes on the radio, desperately calling for medical evacuation. Alpha Base. Alpha Base. This is Alpha 2-4. We have a Marine down in the street, taking heavy fire. She needs immediate extraction. The response was grim. Alpha 2-4, all medevac birds are grounded due to heavy enemy fire. You need to hold position until we can get air support. Jessica tried to move toward the building where her teammates had taken cover, but her legs wouldn't respond properly. The bullets had done more damage than she had initially realized. She was effectively pinned down in the middle of the street, with enemy fighters using her as bait to draw out her fellow Marines. Martinez. Stevens called from the building. Can you move? Negative, she called back, surprised by how weak her voice sounded. Legs aren't working right. She could see Stevens arguing with Hayes, probably wanting to come out and get her. Rodriguez was tending to Peterson, who was still unconscious from his earlier wound. That's when Jessica saw the enemy fighters making their move. A group of insurgents was advancing through the building across the street, trying to get a better angle on her teammates' position. If they succeeded, Hayes and the others would be caught in a crossfire with no escape route. Jessica raised her rifle, fighting through the pain and the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. Her hands were shaking now, whether from blood loss or adrenaline she couldn't tell. But her training took over. She began engaging the advancing enemy fighters with careful, deliberate shots. Each trigger pull sent waves of pain through her wounded body, but she kept firing. One insurgent fell, then another, but there were too many of them, and they had spotted her position. A concentrated volley of fire struck around her, and Jessica felt more bullets finding their mark. Her right shoulder, her side, her other leg, each impact was like being hit with a sledgehammer. The official report would later state that Marine Corporal Jessica Martinez was struck by 14 separate rounds during the Battle of Fallujah, but continued to engage enemy targets and protect her fellow Marines. For over an hour while lying wounded in an exposed position, What the report couldn't capture was the sheer force of will it took to keep fighting when every instinct screamed at her to curl up and wait for the pain to end. Through the haze of pain, Jessica could hear voices from her past. Thompson's mocking tone, "What's the matter, Martinez? The easy assignment not good enough for you?" Stephen's skepticism, "We'll see how long that lasts when the bullets start flying." Well, now they knew. Her radio crackled. "It was Hayes, Martinez, you've done enough. Just stay down and conserve your strength." "Negative," Jessica replied through gritted teeth. "They're still moving on your position. I have eyes on at least 6 more. She shifted slightly, trying to get a better angle on the enemy fighters who were using the chaos of the battle to advance. The movement sent fresh waves of agony through her body, and she could feel more blood soaking into her uniform. But she could also see what her teammates couldn't: a larger group of insurgents moving through the building behind them, preparing to attack from their blind spot. Jessica keyed her radio again. "Hayes, you've got enemy movement in the building behind you. At least 10 fighters, maybe more." "How can you see that from where you are?" Hayes asked. "Elevated position," Jessica replied, which was technically true since she was lying in the middle of the street with a clear view of the surrounding area. What she didn't mention was that her elevated position was also completely exposed to enemy fire. She began engaging the new group of enemy fighters, her shots becoming less accurate as her strength faded, but still effective enough to disrupt their advance. Every time she fired, the enemy would return fire, and more bullets found their way to her already battered body. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio. "Jessica, I can see you from here. You're losing too much blood. You need to stop moving and let us figure out another way." But Jessica knew there was no other way. Her teammates were trapped in that building, and she was the only one in position to keep the enemy from overrunning them. Peterson was unconscious, Stevens was wounded, and Hayes was trying to coordinate with other units for support that might not come in time. It all came down to her as the afternoon wore on. Jessica continued her solitary battle from the street. Her ammunition was running low, her vision was becoming blurry from blood loss, and she could no longer feel her legs at all. But she kept fighting. She thought about her family back home in San Diego, her mother who had been so proud when Jessica graduated from Marine Corps boot camp, her younger brother who looked up to her and wanted to join the military too. What would they think if they could see her now? More importantly, what would they think if she gave up and let her fellow Marines die because she didn't have the strength to keep fighting? The answer was simple. She wasn't going to give up. Jessica Martinez had been underestimated her entire military career. She had been assigned to the easier routes, given the safer missions, and constantly questioned about her ability to handle combat situations. Now, lying in a street in Fallujah with 14 bullet wounds in her body, she was single-handedly holding off enemy forces and protecting her teammates' lives. The girl they had doubted was proving to be tougher than any of them had imagined. But as the sun began to set over the embattled city, Jessica knew her time was running out. Her ammunition was almost gone, her strength was fading fast, and the enemy fighters were getting bolder, moving closer to her position. That's when she heard something that made her heart race with hope. The distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching. But it wasn't the medical evacuation she had been hoping for. It was something much more significant, and it would change everything about how this battle and Jessica's story would end. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, but as the aircraft came into view, Jessica realized they weren't medevac birds. These were attack helicopters, and they were engaging targets throughout the city. The battle for Fallujah was intensifying, not winding down. From her position in the street, Jessica could see the sun setting behind the smoke-filled skyline. She had been lying there for over 3 hours now, her blood slowly spreading across the pavement, but she was still alive and still fighting. Her radio crackled with Hayes' voice. "Martinez, how are you holding up?" Jessica tried to respond but found her voice was barely a whisper. She keyed the radio twice instead, the signal they had agreed on to indicate she was still conscious. "Listen, Martinez," Hayes continued. "I've been in contact with Battalion Commander working on getting us out of here, but it's going to be a while longer. The whole city is lit up." Through her scope, Jessica could see more enemy fighters moving through the buildings around them. Despite the helicopter attacks, the insurgents were still trying to eliminate the trapped Marines. She raised her rifle again, fighting through the exhaustion and pain that threatened to overwhelm her. Her shot took down an insurgent who was preparing to fire an RPG at her teammate's building. It was her last round. Jessica reached for her spare magazines but found her ammunition pouch empty. She had been so focused on protecting her team that she hadn't kept track of her rounds. Now she was weaponless, in the middle of a firefight. She keyed her radio. Hayes, I'm out of ammo. There was a long pause before Hayes responded. Copy that, Martinez. Just ... just hang in there. We're going to figure this out. But Jessica could see what Hayes couldn't. The enemy fighters had realized she was no longer returning fire, and they were getting bolder. A group of insurgents was moving directly toward her position, probably planning to use her as a bargaining chip or worse. She tried to move, to crawl toward her teammates' building, but her body refused to cooperate. The blood loss and shock were taking their toll, and she could feel consciousness slipping away. That's when she heard Rodriguez's voice over the radio. I'm going to get her. Negative. Hayes replied immediately. You'll just get yourself killed, and then we'll have 2 Marines down in that street. Sir, with respect, I can't just lie here and watch her die, Rodriguez said. Jessica forced herself to speak into her radio. Don't come out here, Danny. That's an order. You're not my squad leader, Martinez, Rodriguez replied, and Jessica could hear the smile in his voice despite the circumstances. She watched in horror as Rodriguez left the safety of the building and began moving toward her position, using cover and concealment techniques to avoid enemy fire. The young Marine from Texas was risking his life to save her, just as she had risked hers to save all of them. But the enemy fighters saw him coming. Jessica watched helplessly as they began concentrating their fire on Rodriguez, forcing him to take cover behind a burned-out car just 20 meters away from her. Danny, go back. Jessica called out. I'm not worth it. Like hell you're not. Rodriguez replied. You've been keeping us alive all afternoon, now it's our turn. That's when Jessica saw the insurgent with the grenade moving into position behind Rodriguez. The young Marine couldn't see the threat, and Jessica had no way to warn him in time. Drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she still had, Jessica pushed herself up from the pavement and shouted, Danny, behind you. Rodriguez spun around, just as the insurgent pulled the pin on the grenade. The Marine's rifle barked 3 times in rapid succession, and the enemy fighter dropped the grenade at his own feet. The explosion rocked the street, but Rodriguez was already moving again, reaching Jessica's position as enemy fire intensified around them. You stupid, brave girl, Rodriguez said as he grabbed Jessica's equipment and began dragging her toward cover. Why didn't you tell us you were this tough back at base? Would have saved us all a lot of time. Jessica tried to laugh, but only managed a weak cough. Wanted to surprise you. Rodriguez got her behind the burned-out car and immediately began applying pressure bandages to her worst wounds. Stay with me, Martinez. We're going to get you out of here. Through the radio they could hear Hayes coordinating with other units. Apparently, the helicopter attacks had been successful in clearing out some of the enemy positions, and reinforcements were finally able to move in their direction. Alpha 2-4, this is Alpha 6, came a new voice over the radio. We have Marines moving to your position, ATA 15 minutes. But Jessica wasn't sure she had 15 minutes. The world was becoming fuzzy around the edges, and she could feel her grip on consciousness weakening. Rodriguez seemed to sense her condition. He kept talking to her, telling her stories about his hometown in Texas, his family, anything to keep her engaged and fighting. You know, Martinez, he said while checking her bandages, when we get back to base, Thompson owes you the biggest apology in Marine Corps history. Stevens too. Hell, we all do. Jessica managed a weak smile. Don't tell them, I said. This, but they're not that bad. You're delirious, Rodriguez said with a grin. Must be the blood loss talking. As the minutes ticked by, Jessica could hear the sounds of battle moving closer. The reinforcements were fighting their way through enemy positions to reach them. She just had to hold on a little longer. But as her vision began to fade and her breathing became more labored, Jessica wondered if she would live to see the end of this battle. More importantly, she wondered if her actions today would change anything about how she was perceived by her fellow Marines. What she didn't know was that her story was already spreading through the ranks of every Marine unit in Fallujah. Word was getting out about the female Marine who had held off enemy forces for hours while wounded in an exposed position, protecting her teammates and refusing to give up even when death seemed certain. And in 2 days, that story would reach some very important people who would decide to take a much more personal interest in Corporal Jessica Martinez and her remarkable display of courage under fire. 2 days after the battle in Fallujah, Jessica Martinez lay unconscious in a military hospital bed in Germany, her body fighting to recover from the 14 bullet wounds she had sustained. She was unaware of the storm that was brewing around her story. Back at Forward Operating Base Liberty in Iraq, Sergeant Thompson sat in the chow hall, picking at his meal and avoiding eye contact with the other Marines around him. Word had spread quickly about Martinez's heroic actions, and Thompson was feeling the weight of every dismissive comment he had ever made about her abilities. Heard she held off at least 30 insurgents, one Marine was saying at a nearby table. Wounded and out of ammo, still kept fighting. 14 bullet wounds. Another added, Doc says any one of 3 of them should have killed her, but she kept going for over an hour. Thompson pushed his tray away and stood to leave, but found his path blocked by Rodriguez, who had returned from the hospital where he had stayed with Jessica until she was stable enough for transport. Going somewhere? Thompson, Rodriguez asked, his voice cold. Look, Rodriguez, I know what you're thinking, do you? Rodriguez interrupted, because what I'm thinking is that while Martinez was bleeding out in that street, saving all our lives, you were back here safe and sound, probably still running your mouth about how women don't belong in combat. Other Marines had stopped eating and were watching the confrontation. Thompson felt dozens of eyes on him, and for the first time in his military career, he felt truly ashamed. She proved herself, Thompson said quietly. I'll give her that. She proved herself. Rodriguez stepped closer. Thompson, she didn't prove anything to us. We proved something to ourselves, that we're idiots who couldn't recognize a real Marine when she was standing right in front of us. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in Germany, Jessica was slowly regaining consciousness. The first face she saw belonged to Navy Commander Patricia Wells, a doctor who had been monitoring her condition since her arrival. Welcome back, Corporal Martinez, Dr. Wells said with a smile. You've been out for about 36 hours. Jessica tried to speak but found her throat dry and painful. Dr. Wells gave her some ice chips and waited patiently. My team, Jessica finally managed to croak. Are they? They're all fine, Dr. Wells assured her. Thanks to you, every one of your teammates made it home. Peterson's already been discharged and is back on duty. Relief flooded through Jessica, but it was followed immediately by confusion. Why? Why are you here? I mean, a Navy commander in a Marine medical facility. Dr. Wells smiled mysteriously. Let's just say your story has attracted some high-level attention. But first, you need to focus on getting better. You've got a long recovery ahead of you. What Jessica didn't know was that her actions in Fallujah had been captured on military surveillance drones and witnessed by forward air controllers, who had been coordinating close air support. The footage of a wounded Marine holding off enemy forces for hours while protecting her teammates had made its way up the chain of command, eventually reaching the Pentagon itself. 3 days later, Jessica was strong enough to receive visitors. She was expecting maybe Hayes or Rodriguez, but instead, she found herself face to face with a 2-star general she had never seen before. Corporal Martinez, General Patricia Morrison said, taking a seat beside Jessica's bed. I've come a long way to meet you. Jessica tried to sit up straighter but was still too weak. Ma'am. Relax, Corporal. This isn't a formal visit. I'm here as someone who has spent 30 years in the military fighting the same battles you've been fighting. General Morrison was one of the highest-ranking female officers in the Marine Corps, and Jessica had heard her name mentioned in reverent tones by other female Marines. Corporal, what you did in Fallujah has been documented and verified by multiple sources. You single-handedly held off enemy forces while sustaining injuries that would have incapacitated most Marines. Your actions saved the lives of your entire squad. Jessica felt tears welling up in her eyes. Ma'am, I was just doing my job. No, Corporal, you were doing much more than that. And it's time the Marine Corps recognized not just your individual courage, but what your story represents. General Morrison explained that Jessica's actions had prompted a review of policies regarding female Marines in combat roles. The footage of her battle in Fallujah had been shown to senior leadership, and it had sparked important conversations about capability versus assumptions. There are going to be some changes, Corporal, and some of those changes are going to come from your old unit. 2 weeks later, Jessica was finally strong enough for a video call with her team back in Iraq. When the connection was established, she was surprised to see not just Hayes and Rodriguez, but Thompson and Stevens as well. Martinez, Thompson said, and Jessica could see that the arrogant sergeant looked like a completely different person. I owe you an apology. A big one, actually, Stevens interrupted. We all do, but Thompson's first in line. Thompson nodded. Martinez, I spent months questioning whether you belonged in this unit. Turns out, the question should have been whether I belonged in the same unit as you. Jessica was quiet for a moment, then said, Thompson, we're Marines. We're all on the same team. Yeah, but some of us forgot that for a while, Rodriguez added. The good news is, word about what you did has spread through the entire battalion. Nobody's going to question female Marines' combat capabilities anymore. Not after what you showed them. Hayes leaned into the camera. Martinez, there's something else. Battalion Command has recommended you for the Silver Star. They're also fast-tracking your promotion to Sergeant. Jessica was speechless. The Silver Star was one of the highest decorations for valor in combat, and promotions like that normally took years. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. General Morrison appeared in the background of the video call, having flown to Iraq to deliver news personally. Corporal Martinez, the general said, in addition to your decoration and promotion, you're being assigned to a new position. When you recover, you'll be working with me at Headquarters Marine Corps, helping to develop training programs and policies for integrating female Marines into combat roles. Jessica felt overwhelmed. 6 months ago, she had been assigned to the easier missions because her squad leaders doubted her abilities. Now she was being asked to help shape the future of the Marine Corps. There's one more thing, General Morrison added. The Marine Raiders, our Special Operations Unit, have expressed interest in your tactical abilities and your combat medical skills. When you're fully recovered, if you're interested, there might be an opportunity for you there as well. Jessica looked at the faces on the screen, her teammates who had gone from doubting her to respecting her, the general who was offering her opportunities she had never dreamed of, and Rodriguez who was grinning like he had won the lottery. You know what the best part is, Rodriguez said. Back home, they're calling you the Guardian of Fallujah. There's already talk about making a movie about what you did. Jessica laughed, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her healing wounds. A movie, about me, about all of us, Hayes corrected, about how we learned that courage isn't determined by gender, and how sometimes the person everyone underestimates turns out to be the strongest one in the room. As the video call ended, Jessica lay back in her hospital bed and thought about everything that had changed. She had gone from being the Marine nobody believed in to being someone who would help train the next generation of combat Marines. The girl who had been hit by 14 rounds in Fallujah and refused to give up had not only survived, she had transformed an entire military culture's understanding of what it meant to be a warrior, and in a few months, when she was fully recovered, she would return to active duty not as someone trying to prove she belonged, but as a Marine whose courage was already legendary. The doubters had become believers, and the underestimated had become unstoppable. Martinez had won more than just a battle in the streets of Fallujah. She had won the respect of her peers, the recognition of her superiors, and most importantly, she had won a victory for every female Marine who would serve after her. The 14 rounds that should have ended her story had instead become the foundation of a legacy that would inspire Marines for generations to come.